The mountains of eastern Afghanistan held their breath in the pre-dawn darkness of March 15, 2019. 381 Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, and Special Forces operators lay scattered across a valley that had become their tomb. What should have been a surgical strike to eliminate a high-value Taliban commander had dissolved into chaos when intelligence failed catastrophically. The enemy knew they were coming. Worse, they had been waiting. Major Kestrel Hawkeye Valdez throttled her A-10C Thunderbolt II through the thin mountain air, her knuckles white against the stick. The call had come in 40 minutes ago, a broken transmission crackling with desperation and the sound of automatic weapons fire. Any station, this is Reaper 1-1. We are surrounded and taking heavy casualties. Grid follows. The coordinates placed the firefight in the Korangal Valley, where the peaks rose like jagged teeth against the star-drunk sky. But something felt wrong. The mission briefing had mentioned a small reconnaissance element, maybe 30 operators. The radio chatter suggested something far larger, far more desperate. As Hawkeye banked her aircraft around a ridgeline, the first hints of dawn began to paint the eastern peaks in blood orange. Below, muzzle flashes sparkled like deadly fireflies across the valley floor. "Hawkeye, this is Reaper 1-1 actual," came the strained voice of Master Chief Petty Officer Marcus Ironside Thompson. His usual unflappable demeanor had cracked. "We've got approximately 381 friendlies pinned down across multiple positions. Enemy strength estimated at over 1,000. We're taking fire from all sides." Hawkeye's breath caught. 381. The largest special operations element assembled since the Battle of Mogadishu. Something had gone catastrophically wrong with the intelligence, and now America's elite warriors were trapped in a killing field. She keyed her radio with steady fingers, though her heart hammered against her ribcage. "Reaper 1-1, this is Hawkeye. I'm 2 minutes out with a full combat load. Can you mark your positions?" "Negative on marking," Thompson's voice crackled back. "Enemy has night vision and thermal. Any IR signature will draw more fire onto my boys." Hawkeye studied her tactical display. The valley stretched for nearly 2 miles, with enemy positions scattered along the ridgelines like a constellation of death. Her A-10's 30 GAU-8 Avenger cannon carried 1,100 rounds of depleted uranium shells. Her external pylons held Maverick missiles and general-purpose bombs, enough firepower to level a city block, but against 1,000 entrenched fighters surrounding nearly 400 operators, it might not be enough. The radio crackled again, and this time she heard something that made her blood run cold. The sound of men screaming in pain, calling for medics that couldn't reach them. In that moment, Major Kestrel Valdez understood that everything, her training, her career, her life, had led to this single dawn in the mountains of Afghanistan. The pale light of sunrise revealed a scene from hell. Scattered across the valley floor and climbing the rocky slopes were clusters of American special operators, each group isolated and surrounded by converging Taliban forces. From her cockpit at 15,000 feet, Hawkeye could see the tactical nightmare unfolding below. The enemy had orchestrated an elaborate trap, using false intelligence to lure the largest special operations task force in a decade into a carefully prepared killing ground. Master Chief Thompson's voice cut through the static again, strained but professional. "Hawkeye, I need immediate close air support on grid 774962. Multiple enemy positions along the northern ridgeline, approximately 400 meters from my location." Hawkeye rolled her A-10 into a steep banking turn, the twin turbofan engine screaming as she descended toward the valley. The Thunderbolt II, affectionately known as the Warthog, had been designed for exactly this mission: close air support in contested environments. Its titanium bathtub cockpit could withstand direct hits from small arms fire, and its massive cannon could chew through enemy positions like a chainsaw through paper. "Reaper 1-1, I have eyes on multiple muzzle flashes along the northern ridge. Confirm no friendlies north of your position, over." "Confirmed, Hawkeye. Northern ridge is enemy only. Clear to engage." She lined up her attack run, diving toward the mountain face at 300 knots. The targeting system painted enemy positions in green crosshairs on her heads-up display. At 2,000 feet, she squeezed the trigger, and the GAU-8 cannon roared to life with its distinctive sound, like a giant zipper being ripped open. The 30 shells walked across the ridgeline in precise bursts, each round exploding with devastating effect against rock and flesh. The radio exploded with chatter. Good hits, good hits. Enemy fire from the north has ceased. But even as she pulled up from her attack run, Hawkeye could see new muzzle flashes erupting from positions across the valley. The Taliban had planned this ambush with military precision, positioning fighters in mutually supporting positions that could converge fire on any sector of the valley. Taking out one position only shifted the focus of the attack. "Hawkeye, this is Reaper 2-2, came a new voice, younger, more desperate. "We've got wounded and can't move them. Enemy closing on our position from the east and south. We need immediate support, grid 775018. Hawkeye banked hard left, scanning her tactical display. Reaper 2-2's position lay nearly a mile south of Thompson's group. The enemy had successfully divided the American force into isolated pockets, each facing overwhelming odds. Her fuel gauge showed she had perhaps 90 minutes of loiter time before she'd need to return to base for refueling. "Hawkeye, be advised," Thompson's voice cut through her calculations. "We've identified the enemy commander's position. Large group of fighters with heavy weapons on the central peak, grid 774855. Taking out their leadership might break their coordination." She studied the coordinates. The central peak rose nearly 2,000 feet above the valley floor, offering commanding views of all American positions. But it would also be heavily defended, and her approach would leave her exposed to concentrated anti-aircraft fire. As if reading her thoughts, Thompson added grimly, "Hawkeye, I won't sugarcoat it. This is a suicide mission, but if we don't break their coordination soon, we're all dead anyway." The weight of 381 lives pressed down on Major Kestrel Valdez like a physical force. She had trained for moments like this, but nothing could truly prepare a pilot for the reality of so many warriors depending on her skill, her courage, her willingness to fly into the face of certain death. The morning sun climbed higher, revealing the full scope of the tactical disaster unfolding in the valley below. Through her cockpit canopy, Hawkeye could see the individual groups of special operators more clearly now. Some had found cover behind rocky outcroppings, their defensive positions marked by the occasional glint of weapons and equipment. Others were pinned in the open, unable to move without exposing themselves to devastating crossfire from the surrounding ridgelines. "Reaper 1-1, what's your ammunition status?" she asked, already knowing the answer would be grim. Thompson's response confirmed her fears. "Running critically low on everything. Most positions report less than 3 magazines per man. Medical supplies nearly exhausted. We've got 17 KIA and over 40 WIA, some critical. 17 dead, 40 wounded." The numbers hit Hawkeye like a physical blow. These weren't statistics on a mission report. They were warriors she might have shared meals with, trained alongside, or served with on previous deployments. The special operations community was small and tight-knit. Everyone knew everyone, if not personally, then by reputation. "Roger that. Stand by for another gun run on the eastern approaches." She rolled the A-10 into another attack dive, this time targeting a cluster of enemy positions that had been laying down suppressing fire on Reaper 2-2's location. The cannon's roar filled her headset as she walked another burst of 30 shells across the mountainside. Rock and debris showered down on the Taliban positions, momentarily silencing their weapons. But the respite was brief. As she climbed away from the target area, new firing positions opened up along the ridgelines. The enemy had clearly prepared multiple fallback positions, allowing them to maintain constant pressure even as individual sites were destroyed. "Hawkeye, this is Reaper 3-7, called another voice, older, gravelly with exhaustion and pain. "We're in a bad way down here. Enemy pushing hard from the west. I've got 8 men down and maybe 20 minutes of ammunition left." She checked her tactical display again. Reaper 37 was positioned near the southern mouth of the valley, cut off from the other groups and facing what appeared to be a concentrated push by a large enemy force. If they were overrun, the Taliban would have a clear shot at the other isolated positions. "Reaper 37, I'm inbound your location. Mark your position with V-17 panel if you have one, but be ready to take it down on my command." "Roger, V-17 panel ready." Hawkeye dove toward the southern end of the valley, her eyes scanning for the distinctive orange and pink fluorescent panel that would mark friendly positions. There, a brief flash of color among the rocks before it disappeared as the operators pulled it back under cover. She lined up her attack run on the enemy positions, advancing toward Reaper 37. At 1,500 feet, she opened fire with the GAU-8, sending a stream of depleted uranium shells into the ranks of Taliban fighters attempting to flank the American position. The effect was devastating. Bodies and equipment scattered across the rocky slope like leaves in a hurricane. But as she pulled up from the attack, Hawkeye noticed something that made her blood run cold. Her ammunition counter showed she had burned through nearly a third of her cannon rounds in just 3 attack runs. At this rate, she'd be Winchester, out of ammunition, long before she could adequately support all the isolated American positions. The fuel gauge told an equally grim story. High-speed attack runs at low altitude consumed fuel at an alarming rate. She might have enough for another hour of combat operations before she'd be forced to return to base. 381 American warriors trapped in a valley of death, and she was their only immediate hope of survival. But time and ammunition were running out faster than Taliban fighters. The tactical situation deteriorated with each passing minute. From her position orbiting high above the valley, Hawkeye could see enemy reinforcements streaming down from hidden positions in the surrounding mountains. The Taliban had clearly planned this ambush for weeks, if not months, stockpiling weapons and positioning fighters throughout the region. "All Reaper stations, this is Hawkeye," she transmitted on the common tactical frequency. "I need a consolidated picture of your situation. Report ammunition status, casualties, and immediate threats, over." The responses came back in a litany of desperation. Reaper 11, 40% ammunition remaining, 17 KIA, 12 critical WIA. Enemy pressure constant from north and east. Reaper 22, 30% ammunition, 3 KIA, 8 WIA. Taking heavy fire from elevated positions to our south. Reaper 37, 20% ammunition, 8 KIA, 6 WIA. Enemy attempting to flank from west and southwest. The pattern continued across all call signs. Nearly 400 of America's most elite warriors, trapped and slowly being ground down by overwhelming enemy numbers and superior positioning. Hawkeye's A-10 was their lifeline, but she was running out of options. "Hawkeye, this is Overlord," came a new voice on the tactical frequency, the mission commander at Bagram Air Base. "What's your assessment of the tactical situation?" Colonel James Overlord Mitchell had been monitoring the operation from the Combined Air Operations Center. His question carried layers of meaning. He wasn't just asking for a situation report. He was asking whether the mission was salvageable or if they were looking at a complete disaster. "Overlord, tactical situation is dire. Enemy strength estimated at 12 to 1,500 fighters in prepared positions. Friendly forces isolated in multiple pockets with limited ammunition and heavy casualties. I'm providing close air support but running low on ordnance." A long pause followed. Hawkeye could imagine the frantic activity in the operations center as staff officers calculated options and senior commanders weighed impossible decisions. The political implications of losing nearly 400 special operations personnel in a single engagement would be catastrophic. Hawkeye, additional air support is inbound, but you're looking at 45 minutes minimum before they arrive on station. Can you maintain support until then? She checked her fuel and ammunition gauges again. The numbers were unforgiving. Overlord, that's going to be tight. I'll burn through my remaining ordnance in the next 20 minutes if I maintain current engagement tempo. Understood, do what you can. Help is coming. Help is coming. The phrase carried hope, but 45 minutes might as well be 45 hours for the operators trapped below. Hawkeye banked her aircraft toward another cluster of enemy positions, determined to make every shell count. The radio crackled with Master Chief Thompson's voice. Hawkeye, enemy commander's position is still active on the central peak. Their coordination is keeping us pinned. If you can disrupt their command and control. She looked toward the central peak, rising like a fortress above the valley floor. Intelligence reports suggested the Taliban commander had established his position there specifically because it offered 360-degree observation of the entire battlefield. Taking him out would require flying directly into the most heavily defended position in the valley. Reaper 1-1 understood. I'll make a run on the central peak. Hawkeye, Thompson's voice carried a note of warning. That position is heavily fortified. Multiple anti-aircraft weapons confirmed. It's going to be extremely dangerous. Major Kestrel Valdez had never backed down from danger. Her call sign, Hawkeye, hadn't been earned through caution or hesitation. It had come from her uncanny ability to identify and engage targets that others missed, often in the most challenging circumstances. The central peak loomed ahead, its rocky face scarred with defensive positions and fortifications. This would be the most dangerous attack run of her career, but 381 American lives hung in the balance. The approach to the central peak would leave Hawkeye exposed for nearly 30 seconds, an eternity in aerial combat. As she lined up her attack run, she could see muzzle flashes erupting from multiple positions along the mountainside. The Taliban had positioned heavy machine guns and possibly shoulder-fired surface-to-air missiles throughout the defensive network. "All stations, this is Hawkeye," she transmitted, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. "I'm making an attack run on the central peak. Recommend all friendly forces take cover and prepare for possible debris." She pushed the throttles forward, diving toward the mountain face at maximum speed. The A-10's airspeed indicator climbed past 400 knots as she descended through 8,000 feet. Tracer rounds began reaching toward her aircraft, green streams of death that seemed to move in slow motion but covered the distance with frightening speed. At 4,000 feet, she could see the enemy command position clearly. Sandbag fortifications surrounded a communications array and what appeared to be a weapons cache. Figures moved between the positions, some pointing in her direction and others manning heavy weapons that swiveled to track her approach. The first surface-to-air missile launched when she was at 3,000 feet, its smoke trail arcing up from a position to her left. Hawkeye threw the A-10 into a hard right turn, chaff and flares dispensing automatically from the aircraft's defensive systems. The missile passed harmlessly behind her, but she knew others would follow. At 2,000 feet, she steadied her aircraft and centered the targeting reticle on the command position. Heavy machine gun fire now filled the air around her cockpit, the distinctive crack of rounds passing close by her aircraft. One bullet starred her right side window, spiderwebbing the armored glass but not penetrating. Come on," she whispered, waiting for the perfect shot. At 1,500 feet, she squeezed the trigger and held it down, walking a sustained burst of 30 fire directly across the command position. The shells detonated in sequence, obliterating sandbag walls and communications equipment. Secondary explosions erupted as ammunition stores cooked off, sending flames and debris high into the morning air. But as she pulled up from the attack run, Hawkeye felt her aircraft shudder. The master caution light illuminated on her instrument panel, accompanied by the distinctive whine of damaged hydraulics. She had taken hits, though the A-10's legendary durability was keeping her airborne. Good hits on the central peak, Thompson's voice crackled through her headset. Enemy fire has decreased significantly across all sectors. Outstanding work, Hawkeye. She allowed herself a moment of satisfaction before checking her aircraft systems. The hydraulic pressure gauge showed yellow, not critical, but definitely concerning. More importantly, her ammunition counter now showed less than 200 rounds remaining. She had perhaps 3 or 4 short bursts left before going Winchester. Reaper 1-1, I'm running critically low on ordnance. What's the status on additional air support? Hawkeye, this is Overlord, came the controller's voice from Bagram. Fast movers are still 30 minutes out. Can you extend your time on station? She looked at her fuel gauge. The damaged hydraulic system was causing increased drag, burning fuel faster than normal. Overlord, I can give you maybe 15 more minutes before I have to RTB for fuel. 15 minutes to keep 381 special operators alive until help arrived. It seemed impossible, but Hawkeye had built her reputation on achieving the impossible. The destruction of the enemy command post had created a temporary lull in the fighting, but Hawkeye could see Taliban fighters regrouping along the ridgelines. Without their centralized coordination, the enemy attacks had become more sporadic and less effective, but they still possessed overwhelming numerical superiority. All Reaper stations, this is Hawkeye. I need you to consolidate your positions if possible. Move wounded to the most defensible locations and prepare for extraction. Master Chief Thompson responded immediately. Hawkeye, we've got wounded scattered across multiple positions. Some of these boys can't be moved without risking their lives. It was the classic combat dilemma. Leave the wounded behind to save the majority, or risk everyone in an attempt to save all. For Special Operations Forces, the answer was always the same: no one gets left behind. But that creed might doom them all in this situation. Reaper 1-1, can you identify the most critical casualties that absolutely cannot be moved? A pause, then Thompson's gravelly voice. 4 critical cases at Reaper 2-2's position, 3 more with Reaper 4-6. They're not going anywhere without medical evacuation. Hawkeye studied her tactical display. Those 2 positions were nearly a mile apart and surrounded by enemy forces. Any rescue attempt would require clearing multiple approach routes and establishing landing zones under fire. Even with additional air support inbound, it would be a nightmare operation. But as she looked down at the valley, something caught her attention. The terrain between several of the isolated positions formed a natural corridor, a winding path through the rocks that might allow movement between friendly positions without exposing troops to direct fire from the main enemy positions. Reaper 1-1, I'm seeing a possible covered route between your position and Reaper 2-2. Grid 774980 to 775025. Can you confirm line of sight from enemy positions? Thompson's response came after a moment of consultation with his team leaders. Hawkeye, that route is partially covered, but there are 3 points where we'd be exposed to enemy observation. We'd need those positions suppressed during any movement. She checked her ammunition counter again. 150 rounds remaining. Not much, but perhaps enough if she made every shot count. Roger that. I can suppress those positions, but it'll burn through my remaining ammunition. Once I'm Winchester, you'll be on your own until the cavalry arrives. Understood. We're ready to move on your mark. Hawkeye rolled into her final attack run, targeting the enemy positions that could observe the movement corridor. At 1,000 feet, she opened fire with precise 3-second bursts, walking her remaining shells across each position with surgical accuracy. The GAU-8 fell silent with a mechanical click that seemed to echo through her cockpit. Winchester. She was now out of ammunition, but the covered route was clear. All stations, this is Hawkeye. I'm Winchester on the gun. The corridor is clear for movement. Execute immediately. From her orbiting position, she watched as small groups of American operators began moving through the rocky terrain, carrying wounded comrades and essential equipment. They moved like ghosts, using every fold in the terrain to stay invisible to enemy observers. But time was running out. Her fuel gauge showed less than 20 minutes remaining before she'd be forced to return to base. And without ammunition, she could only serve as an observer for the final phase of this desperate battle. The radio crackled with a new voice, one she hadn't heard before, speaking with the calm authority of a senior officer. Hawkeye, this is Paladin 77 inbound your location. 2 F-16s with full combat loads, approximately 15 minutes out. 15 minutes. The exact amount of time she had left before fuel starvation forced her to leave the battlefield. For the first time since receiving the initial distress call, Major Kestrel Valdez allowed herself to believe that 381 American warriors might actually make it home. With her ammunition expended, Hawkeye found herself in the strange position of being a spectator to the battle she had been dominating for the past hour. Her A-10 circled the valley like a wounded bird, still drawing occasional small arms fire from enemy positions, but no longer able to respond with devastating effect. Below, the consolidation of American forces continued with methodical precision. The special operators moved in teams, bounding from cover to cover while maintaining overwatch for their comrades. Despite being outnumbered and low on ammunition, they executed the movement with the professional competence that had made them legends in military circles worldwide. Hawkeye, this is Reaper 11. Thompson's voice carried a note of strained optimism. We've successfully consolidated 4 positions and recovered most of our wounded. Enemy contact has decreased significantly since you took out their command post. Outstanding work, Reaper 11. Be advised, I'm running critical on fuel, but fast movers are inbound in 10 minutes. She could see the consolidated American positions now, roughly 8 defensive clusters scattered across the valley floor, each containing between 30 and 60 operators. The wounded had been moved to the most defensible locations, and the remaining ammunition had been redistributed to create interlocking fields of fire. But the Taliban weren't finished. From her elevated position, Hawkeye could see enemy fighters massing for what appeared to be a final coordinated assault. Without centralized command, it had taken them time to reorganize, but their numerical advantage remained overwhelming. All Reaper stations, this is Hawkeye. I'm observing large-scale enemy movement from multiple directions. Looks like they're preparing for a final push on your positions. Master Chief Thompson's response was typically understated. Roger that. We see them too. Going to be interesting. Interesting. Only a Navy SEAL would describe facing 1,000 enemy fighters with that level of casual understatement. But Hawkeye could hear the tension underlying his calm, professional demeanor. They all knew this was likely to be their final stand. Her fuel gauge now showed 12 minutes of flight time remaining. The F-16s were still 8 minutes out. 4 minutes of gap time when 381 special operators would face the full weight of the Taliban assault with no air support. Overlord, this is Hawkeye, she transmitted to the command center. I need immediate coordination with inbound fast movers. Tactical situation is critical. Hawkeye, Paladin 77 is monitoring this frequency. You have tactical control until fuel state requires your departure. The radio crackled with a new voice, younger, confident, carrying the distinctive accent of the American South. Hawkeye, this is Paladin 77 flight lead. 2 F-16s inbound with mixed ordnance. Request tactical overview. Major Kestrel Valdez had never been so relieved to hear another pilot's voice. Paladin 77, Multiple friendlies consolidated in 8 defensive positions across the valley floor. Enemy strength estimated at 800 plus, massing for coordinated assault from north, east, and south ridgelines. Priority targets are heavy weapons positions and concentrations of personnel. Roger that, Hawkeye. We have data link with your aircraft and can see friendly positions marked on tactical display. Estimate 3 minutes to weapons release. 3 minutes. The enemy assault would likely begin before the F-16s could engage. Hawkeye watched helplessly as Taliban fighters moved into assault positions along the ridgelines, their AK-47s and RPGs glinting in the morning sunlight. The first mortar rounds began falling among the American positions, sending up geysers of rock and dust. The operators had prepared as best they could, but mortars were nearly impossible to defend against in open terrain. Incoming mortars, someone shouted over the tactical frequency, taking casualties at Reaper 37. Hawkeye's hands tightened on her flight controls. Every instinct screamed at her to dive back into the fight, but without ammunition and with critically low fuel, she could only watch as the final battle began. Then, cutting through the chaos of radio chatter and explosions, came the sound that would haunt her dreams and inspire her legend. The distinctive whistle of F-16 engines diving at maximum speed toward the valley floor. The arrival of Paladin 77 changed everything. The lead F-16 rolled into a steep dive toward the northern ridgeline, where the heaviest concentration of enemy fighters had assembled for their assault. At 8,000 feet, the pilot released a pair of 500-pound joint direct attack munitions that struck the ridgeline with devastating precision. The explosions lit up the mountainside like miniature suns, the shock waves rolling across the valley floor seconds later. Entire sections of the Taliban assault force simply vanished in the coordinated blast, leaving craters where moments before there had been dozens of fighters. "Good hits, Paladin 77, Thompson's voice carried genuine relief. Enemy assault from the north has been broken up. But the Taliban forces on the eastern and southern ridgelines continued their advance, apparently undeterred by the destruction of their northern elements. RPG rounds began impacting near the consolidated American positions, forcing the operators deeper into cover. The second F-16 acquired targets along the eastern approaches, its pilot demonstrating the same precision as his flight lead. A string of smaller bombs walked across the mountainside, each explosion carefully placed to maximize damage to enemy positions while avoiding any risk to the Americans below. Hawkeye watched the aerial ballet with professional appreciation. The F-16 pilots were demonstrating textbook close air support, but she noticed something they might not have seen from their higher altitude approach patterns. "Paladin 77, this is Hawkeye. Be advised, I'm observing enemy movement in dead space along the southern valley wall, approximately grid 774875. Large group of fighters with heavy weapons moving to flank Reaper 22's position." "Roger, Hawkeye, I see them now, rolling in hot." The lead F-16 banked sharply left, lining up an attack run parallel to the valley wall. From her position, Hawkeye could see the enemy fighters clearly, at least 60 Taliban with RPGs and heavy machine guns, using a fold in the terrain to approach the American positions undetected. The F-16's 20 cannon erupted in a sustained burst, walking shells along the mountainside with lethal accuracy. The enemy formation scattered, some fighters falling immediately while others dove for whatever cover they could find among the rocks. "Excellent work, Paladin 77. That flanking movement has been neutralized." Hawkeye's fuel gauge now showed 8 minutes remaining. The immediate crisis had passed with the arrival of the F-16s, but her role in this battle was nearly over. Soon, she would have to turn toward home, leaving the final phases of the operation to other hands. "Hawkeye, this is Overlord," came the familiar voice of the mission commander. Combat search and rescue is inbound your location, ETA 20 minutes. What's your assessment for helicopter landing zones? She studied the valley floor through her binoculars, looking for areas flat enough and large enough to accommodate multiple A-60 Black Hawks while remaining defensible against enemy fire. Overlord, I can identify 3 possible LZs. Primary LZ at grid 774990, secondary at 775045, tertiary at 774895. All LZs will require ongoing suppression of surrounding high ground. Roger that. CSAR flight will coordinate with Paladin 77 for LZ security. The pieces of the rescue operation were falling into place. The F-16s would provide ongoing close air support, the Black Hawks would extract the operators and wounded, and the nightmare that had begun before dawn would finally end. But as Hawkeye prepared to depart the battlefield, she found herself reluctant to leave. For the past 90 minutes, she had been the lifeline keeping 381 American warriors alive. Her A-10 had absorbed damage, burned through its entire combat load, and pushed its systems to the absolute limit in service of that mission. Reaper 1-1, this is Hawkeye, she transmitted on the tactical frequency. I'm approaching Bingo Fuel and will be departing station momentarily. It's been an honor flying with you today. Master Chief Thompson's response came back immediately, his voice carrying an emotion that special operations personnel rarely allowed to show. Hawkeye, the honor has been entirely ours. Without you, none of us would be going home today. Godspeed. As Major Kestrel Valdez turned her battered A-10 toward home, she could see the first A-60 Black Hawks appearing as distant specks on the eastern horizon. The rescue was beginning, and 381 American warriors would live to fight another day. The flight back to Bagram Air Base passed in contemplative silence. Hawkeye's A-10 limped through the Afghan sky, its damaged hydraulic system requiring constant attention and its fuel gauges showing dangerously low levels. She had pushed her aircraft and herself to the absolute limit, and both had performed magnificently when it mattered most. The radio crackled occasionally with updates from the valley. The CSAR helicopters had successfully reached the landing zones and were beginning the evacuation of wounded personnel. The Taliban forces, decimated by the concentrated air attacks and demoralized by the destruction of their leadership, had largely withdrawn to defensive positions in the higher mountains. "Hawkeye, this is Overlord," came the voice of Colonel Mitchell as she approached the airbase. "Be advised, priority handling is authorized for your aircraft. Emergency equipment standing by." She keyed her microphone. "Overlord Hawkeye, aircraft is flight capable but showing hydraulic anomalies. Request normal approach and landing." The tower controller's response carried professional concern. "Hawkeye, cleared direct to runway 27. Wind calm, visibility unlimited. Fire rescue equipment is positioned and standing by." As the runway threshold passed beneath her aircraft, Hawkeye reflected on the events of the morning. She had arrived over the valley expecting a routine close air support mission for a small reconnaissance element. Instead, she had found herself in the largest aerial rescue operation since Vietnam, responsible for keeping nearly 400 special operations personnel alive until help could arrive. The A-10's main landing gear touched down with unusual firmness, another indication of the hydraulic damage, but the aircraft rolled to a smooth stop on the runway. Ground crews immediately surrounded the Thunderbolt II, their trained eyes examining the battle damage that told the story of the morning's engagement. As Hawkeye shut down her engines and began the post-flight inspection, she counted 17 bullet holes in her aircraft's fuselage and wings. 3 rounds had struck the armored titanium cockpit, leaving deep gouges but failing to penetrate. The right engine showed signs of shrapnel damage, and the hydraulic system would require extensive repairs before the aircraft could fly again. But her A-10 had brought her home safely, just as it had protected 381 American warriors in their darkest hour. The Thunderbolt II had been designed for exactly this kind of mission, close air support in the most dangerous environments, and today it had proved worthy of its reputation. Colonel Mitchell was waiting as she climbed down from the cockpit, his expression combining relief and professional respect. "Major Valdez, I've been monitoring the tactical reports all morning. Outstanding work under extremely challenging conditions." "Thank you, sir. How are the casualties from the valley?" "Still being evaluated, but early reports suggest that your intervention prevented a complete disaster. The final count shows 23 KIA and 67 WIA, but that's significantly better than the alternative. Without your actions, we might have been looking at total loss of the task force." 23 dead. The number hit her harder than she expected, even though she knew the casualties would have been far worse without her intervention. Each of those 23 represented a family that would receive a folded flag, and the gratitude of a nation that might never fully understand the sacrifice made in an unnamed valley in Afghanistan. "Sir, what happened with the intelligence? How did nearly 400 operators walk into such a perfect ambush?" Mitchell's expression darkened. "That's still being investigated. Preliminary analysis suggests our intelligence network was compromised at a high level. Someone fed the Taliban detailed information about the operation, including timing, strength, and approach routes." The implications were staggering. A betrayal at that level could have compromised dozens of other operations and endangered countless personnel throughout the region. The investigation would be extensive and would likely reach the highest levels of the intelligence community. As Hawkeye walked toward the debriefing facility, she reflected on the strange twists of fate that had placed her over the valley at precisely the moment when 381 lives hung in the balance. The debriefing session lasted 3 hours. Intelligence officers, operations personnel, and senior